Hey guys, so thank you so much for tuning in. What I want this video to be is kind of a rundown of behind the scenes of the Internship project. For the last 11 months to about a year, we've been going pretty strong, and the reason we've been going pretty strong is because the help we've received from so many unexpected quarters. Wherever we've gone, honestly, we've always been overwhelmed by the support that we've got, whether it's from students, organizations, professors, families even, who kind of extend as much help as they can. And I think it's really because they've sort of been captivated by the idea, or get behind the idea, that Pakistan is a place or a natural place for your skills and talents, and the only way to help Pakistan is not just through charity. But often the question that we get most is, can you show us behind the scenes, or how do you actually get these internships into being, and how did you start the Internship project, and that sort of thing. So what I want this video to be is kind of a snippet into the behind the scenes of the project, how we get things done, what we get up to, who we're talking to, and that sort of thing. What the time frame is about 7 to 8 days that we recently spent in North America in Toronto, where we got up to a bunch of fun stuff, whether it was meeting professors at Harvard, talking to university students in the Northeast, or doing some fundraisers in Toronto. There's a bunch of stuff that's going to be in this video, and I hope you do enjoy this kind of content. Our aim is to kind of roll out some more videos explaining why we're in existence, what we're doing, how people can apply, the impact people can have, and that sort of thing. So if you find this interesting, do let us know, and we'd be happy to make more of this kind of stuff. So let's get into it. The trip took place in two places, Boston and Toronto. There were a few visits to the outskirts of each, but I'll kind of run through where we were at each stage. So I landed on the Friday, spent the weekend with my aunt and her children. They live in Boston. I was able to play with their dog and also go to Legal Seafoods, which was kind of a staple on the Boston map. But on Monday 8 AM, that's when the work sort of began, and we'd arranged a meeting with Professor Hausman. And the reason that had come about is because another professor in the development department of Harvard had kind of heard about the Internship project and talked about how reversing brain drains and the use of the diaspora was quite important, and that's something that Professor Hausman focuses on. So this was an enormous meeting for us because I have also heard of Professor Hausman. I've read a bunch of his stuff. He's been involved in a huge number of things, whether it's a lot of very significant World Bank initiatives, whether it's with the Central Bank of Venezuela, whether it's generally in academia and progressing the development space forward. So this was a huge name, and it was a huge honor to actually meet him. He also heads up something which is quite unique to us and quite special for us as the Internship project. That's something called the Growth Lab in Harvard. So the Growth Lab is designed to make very specific, very tailor-made policies, or advise governments on how to make these policies in developing economies. The reason this came about is because often the economic models or the economic advice that you kind of get in the mainstream of academics is very much tailor-made to scenarios which aren't really the case in developing economies. So for example, the best way to explain this is that getting things done in developing economies normally involves different kinds of friction to what is the case in developed economies. And what the Growth Lab has kind of developed to explain this concept is something called the complexity indicator. So the complexity indicator, or complexity index, is a way of essentially showcasing how complicated it is to do certain things within an economy. So for example, setting up a business is kind of known as the ease of doing business, or starting up a company is important because you only fuel innovation if that's made easy. And often the case is in developing economies that that process is drowned in bureaucracy, and you have to go through a bunch of loopholes and you have to jump up a few hoops before you can kind of set up your own company. Whereas that might not necessarily be the case in developed economies, although it's not as black and white as that. Another good example is getting an internship, for example, in a developing economy is pretty different to how you would go about it in a developed economy in a lot of cases. So here you kind of put your CV and cover letter together, send it towards a company. They either say they like you, they don't like you, they interview you, and then you get the job. And that's pretty much the process. Of course, there are cases of nepotism, of course there are cases of discrimination, but more or less that's the case. Whereas in a country like Pakistan, more often than not, you're probably not going to see such a linear transition from application to successful or unsuccessful application. You're going to see things like, for example, someone ringing their uncle and saying, hey, can I have this role for my friend, whatever like that, something like that. Or you're going to see the case of bribery, or you're going to see the case that internships that are advertised often go to people that the people who are advertising it know already. So it's not as linear. So the reason it's really important is because it can help us understand the hurdles that countries have to overcome. So an example of a country that Harvard has been able to help through this kind of process is Albania. And Albania is a country which has obviously gone through the post-communist phase in which a lot of things were stifled in society, where the innovation was at an all-time low. Some of the infrastructure was very outdated because communism hadn't allowed it to develop in a functioning way, and a bunch of other things that come along with a society developing. But one of the interesting things is that a lot of Albanians, knowing that the situation wasn't great in their own country, had to seek opportunities abroad. And so there was a great number of Albanians abroad who developed something called know-how. And that's what they've termed it in Harvard. Know-how is essentially exposure to ideas that aren't indigenous to the country that you come from. So whether it's kind of the best practice of how to do business in a particular workplace, or kind of how to treat different individuals in a workplace that is at an optimum level, and that sort of thing. Now, this is not to be patronizing to Albania, because I'm sure most Albanians and most people in developing countries have a lot of common sense. It's just the case that that hasn't been allowed to take place as the norm in the developing country, just because of, for whatever reason, in this case, the post-communist society, which stifled a lot of basic liberties, basic freedoms, and there wasn't so much of an inflow of economic or social ideas. And so Harvard helped Albania create something called the Ministry for Diaspora, something that is akin to something like the Ministry of Overseas Pakistanis. And the reason is because a lot of Albanians obviously had their hearts in Albania, even if their minds were developing somewhere abroad. And so how do you leverage that ability to take skills and knowledge and transfer it to the place where it most needs to be? And so that's something that really appealed to us as the Dil Internship project, because what we're trying to do is leverage a whole bunch of people who care about Pakistan, who really want to help Pakistan, but often don't know or haven't known the best way to kind of channel that energy into helping Pakistan, and don't know where to best place themselves in that entire journey. So that meeting was really productive, and kind of we came to a conclusion that I should spend a bit of time in Harvard going to various lectures, going to various meetings with other people, so we can help refine this idea that we've come up with called the Dil Internship project, and help make it much better. And then in the evening of that same day, after the meetings with Professor Houseman, we were able to kind of go to a meeting with the Harvard, MIT and Wellesley PSAs, and kind of showcase the Dil Internship project to them and highlight how they can get involved, what sort of opportunities are available through the Dil Internship project, and how they would go about applying. And as always, this was always kind of the most interesting thing for me, because I can kind of see the students and the prospective interns and what they really want to see from an internship. And it was interesting how people's interests lie in different areas. So there are some people who want to do the public policy stuff, whether it's working with the climate change industry, some ministry, or the IT ministry. And then there are some people who want to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of a textile factory in the inner industrial area of Karachi. And both of them are equally as exciting to me, because it really shows how much of a gap there is in terms of the market for ideas within Pakistan. So the next morning, I was able to attend a bunch of lectures that Professor Houseman had kind of recommended for me, and a lot of them were to do with kind of doing business in a developing economy, or how to create organizations in developing economies. They all took place in the Kennedy School, and I was super grateful for that opportunity. I got to meet a bunch of people that were working on projects that weren't really similar, but were taking place in developing economies, and we kind of exchanged notes on how they'd been able to do it and how I could learn from their experience. So I'm really grateful for all the kind of hands of friendship that were extended in this very short amount of time. And in the afternoon, actually, Professor Houseman was doing a lecture himself. And there was a lot of free food available, as you can kind of see. But he was talking about the Kennedy School's experience in Albania, why it was important, and the huge impact that they've actually had on policy. So in the evening, I actually caught up with both of my cousins, who both go to Harvard University, and they're actually both at the business school. Obviously, I didn't get the good genes in the family, and that was nice, because this is only the third time I think I've seen them in my life. And they're both doing well. So the next day I spent catching up with a lot of friends. A lot of it was kind of to do with their own projects and kind of seeing how they'd got along. I even got to sit in on a lecture with the CEO of Ripple in the business school, and he's doing some very interesting things in disrupting the cyber currency space with Bitcoin, etc, etc. And it was very interesting to see, because a lot of the companies that actually we're trying to work with, or we are working with within Pakistan, are trying to bring cyber currencies to Pakistan, which is a very interesting thing. And obviously the conversation around should developing economies with very weak currencies adopt Bitcoin, that came up, and it was great to learn from people who were so much more experienced than me in this space. Then I had a few meetings, a few lunches before embarking on a trip to Wellesley, which is obviously a very known liberal arts college in Boston. I got to see around the place. It was fun to kind of see the campus, see where Hillary Clinton went to college, and that was a great experience. But that was my last stop in Boston before we actually embarked on a 10-hour coach journey to Toronto. Now, I would not recommend this because there are much easier ways of getting from Boston to Toronto, namely plane, maybe even train is easier, but this bus journey was something that I'd always wanted to do, because I've kind of heard of Greyhound buses as the kind of bus of America, and kind of some people do trips across the country in it. But now I know why so many people advised me against it. There were actually 3 stops between Boston and Toronto, and I actually took an overnight bus. So at 2 a.m, 4 a.m, and I think 6 a.m, I had to kind of be up and transition buses. The stops were, I believe, Albany, which is the capital of New York State, Syracuse, which is upstate New York, and then finally Buffalo, which is just near the Canadian border. And it was quite a seamless transition, kind of when we crossed the river and into Canada. There weren't really many questions, and it was a good experience overall. But I would say that if time and comfort are priorities for you, maybe this is not the best way of getting there. So when we arrived in Toronto, it was pretty much straight away that we would get into business. Our first port of call was a meeting with Imran Siddiqui, who was the Consul General. We'd been put in touch with him with a few other high commissions that we've been working with to try and get the word out about the Internship project to the various populations that they're operating in. And honestly, I don't know if I'm allowed to even mention him by name, but he is a gem of a human being. He really sorted us out. He gave us an entire Rolodex of people that we should kind of contact in the next few days, how to make that happen, how to basically make the most of our time in Canada. And one thing I will give credit to both the Canadian and American Pakistani communities for is that they are super well organized. Honestly, like, they are regimented in the way that they kind of do business, and that is encouraging to see, and it's great to see that they brought that organization to the Internship project. One thing I would say about Imran Saab is that, you know, when you are involved in a bureaucracy, that now I've kind of got to see a bit more closely with the kind of work I've been doing for the last 1.5 years, and to still have the level of enthusiasm and passion that he has for his job is amazing. Normally people, you know, no matter how good their intentions are, how up for it they are, their excitement kind of wanes and they become jaded by a system that is not so streamlined as and not so efficient as you would want. And so to see that kind of passion coming through someone who's had a career for 35 years in the civil service of Pakistan, that was enormous, and I was super grateful that he kind of extended that goodwill to us. So in the evening, we had a fundraiser actually planned in a township called Oakville, which is on the suburbs of Toronto, and that's actually where a lot of Pakistanis live, particularly Pakistani medics, I think. And so it was great. We had a meetup of about 45 people. This is what I mean. The love shown to us by various quarters was enormous. The fact that 45 people would spend their Friday evenings talking to us about the Internship project means so much to me, and it was great to kind of get their input. We got a lot of connections out of it. We were able to fundraise, which I'll talk a bit about in a second, and they also offered to kind of show me around Toronto, and I had to politely decline just because I was only there for about 36 more hours. So that meeting took about 2 hours, where we kind of showcased what we were all about, how they could get involved, and why it was important that Canada didn't kind of lag behind America and the UK, where we have quite a substantial presence in. The next day, I kind of realized that I was living about 2 blocks away from a pretty good friend that I just completely forgot lived in Toronto. He's one of those, you know, that moves around a bit, so I'd not understood that. So I remembered that, messaged him, and kind of transitioned all my bags to his apartment. this was the view. It's pretty sweet. I was really lucky to kind of experience this for the for 2 days. Then I had brunch with another friend who had recently moved from the UK to Canada, and it was good to see his insight on the best way to kind of leverage his network here for the Dil Internship project. So after that, we had a meeting with a person with a technology background. It was really good to kind of touch base with him because he had moved from Pakistan, brought his skills here in the cyberspace, and it was kind of interesting on two parts. It was good to see what he thought was the major pitfalls or the major obstacles facing the Pakistani tech space, but it was also encouraging to see why he thought Pakistan could be the next destination or a hub for kind of technological development or software in the next few years, if the government or if the kind of industry plays its cards right, which is of course what we're here for, or what we're here to facilitate. Then I kind of had two interviews, one with a institution called Toronto 360, I believe, which is kind of the Pakistani community's main television network within the area or within Canada, and it was kind of good to have an interview with them. Then I had the final interview with Canada 1, which was actually my first ever interview in Urdu. You guys can see it, I'll drop a link in the description, and please do check it out. I've always done interviews in English, and this was the first time that I've actually done it in Urdu, so it would be interesting to hear feedback on how warped you think my accent is. But it was great because I think their viewership is obviously very solid. They have a few 100,000 likes on Facebook, so it was great to kind of get the word out about the project. Then straight from the interview, I kind of went to the airport and made my way back. So I hope this gives you a sense of kind of what we get up to behind the scenes and how we've been able to develop the project to the point where it is right now, and what sort of things we're looking into doing. If you have any questions about this video, or if you have any questions in general, please do reach out at info@dilinternshipproject.com, or just message me or any of the team on our Instagrams or via the emails that are listed on the website. So thank you for listening if you made it this far, and do watch out for a few more things like this on our website, where we're going to try and explain what we're doing, what the purpose is behind what we're doing, and why we're so excited about it.